welcome once again. I've got a bit of a cough, so if you hear me mute, it's because I'm coughing away. But I'm going to let Jason speak on that. So I've got Jason again, Jason Bavanandan, and I enjoyed. It's one of my all-time favorite podcasts. The last time we spoke, and so Jason's also a mentor. So I was thinking, let's probe that part of his life a bit as well, and ask about the music industry, and also just have a laugh. Jason, hey, how you doing, Jason?
Yeah,
Anyway, sorry.
I'm good, Raj. I'm good. It's good to be back with you again. We had so much fun last time. We sort of ran out of minutes, so I think it's good to jump back in and just kind of continue the conversation. The conversation never really ends, right? It's just a journey of exchanging ideas.
Absolutely. So yeah, how have you been since we last spoke? I know we were doing a bit off air, and we get carried away, and I think we got a
Yeah,
bit philosophical as well in parts.
yeah,
But
yeah.
yeah, how have you been anyway? So family and
I've been good, yeah. Usual thing, kind of like with like family and like kids and that. But I think like work-wise, it's been interesting. I don't know how much we mentioned last time about, but there was a band that I was in 20 years ago called Battle,
yeah,
and we are looking. There's a kind of big kind of cultural re-interest in that early noughties time in culture, in pop culture, just before social media and before smartphones, and so. My band was like one of the kind of like major proponents in that scene. And so we've been hanging out again. And because our record label got in touch and said, would you be interested in maybe doing a gig and like, perhaps reforming? So that's been really interesting, getting back together with those guys because we haven't played together for 20 years.
wow,
And so putting on a guitar and getting into a rehearsal room and, playing music again and like those songs that I wrote when I was like a late teenager in my early 20s, it's really interesting as an adult 20 years later going back and listening to those songs and like working out how to play them again. And it's like it's really interesting. It's like I don't know if you've ever had this, but you come back to a song you wrote years and years ago, it's like it was written by someone else, a whole different person. And so I'm very grateful for the chance to kind of collaborate with my younger self because I'm not the person I was 20 years ago. I think people
absolutely, yeah.
change so much. So when you pick something up that you last left 2 decades ago, it's like it might as well be someone else's music. And so I'm really enjoying that. I'm enjoying this weird collaboration like across time.
And it's like a snapshot of you at that point, isn't it? And you look back, it's like a photograph almost of you at that time,
Yeah,
of your mindset.
yeah,
And
exactly. And like you look at the way things were written, the way you did things, or like the way like what the lyrics are doing, what they're saying, and exactly as you say, it's a snapshot of your state of mind. And I'm being forced to have to like kind of analyze it because I can't remember all the words and things. So I was having to sort of remember what I was talking about. And I was like, oh, that's interesting, the state of mind I was in. Why did I think that? Why did I feel that? Obviously, the culture in the world was different, certainly in like pop music back then. So the kind of way feelings and emotions were communicated is slightly different to how we would do them now. And that's the thing I'm most aware of now. It's like how much things have changed in terms of the content in pop music, like the actual pop, like whether it's pop or rock or jazz or whatever, like the lyric writing, what people talk about is way more important than it's ever been. And actually, over time, it's always been important. It's always been having increasing importance because there's only so many notes. We can't invent more notes, but we
mhm.
can invent new ways to talk about things that are universal themes. So the kind of like the idea of like us, 20 years ago, no one would probably have had a song about like their crippling anxiety in a pop song. Whereas now someone can talk about that, and it can be within like the most poppiest of genres, but it could be a song that blows up and it's all about your state of mind and how you feel scared or vulnerable or whatever. Nothing, you don't have, not everything has to be so braggadocious, anymore, right? People are much more honest about their feelings. So I'm finding that really interesting. Yeah, looking at how things have changed.
But do you think that's like mainstream pop? Because I agree with you. Like on TikTok, I found loads of indie rock because I love sort of indie rock from sort of nineties and stuff. And there's a independent movement of these kind of artists. I don't know whether you see
Mm.
Maya Lakhani, who I had on my show like this is a few months ago, and she's like a female Asian rock artist. But
Yeah,
she's
yeah, yeah,
really
yeah,
cool, really cool. She was on Glastonbury recently as well, and there's a few other
yeah,
bands which are starting, and they talk about exactly what you're saying, like anxiety and those kind of subjects, which
yeah.
are not normal pop sort of thing.
And it's not normal pop exactly. And I think people who are born into, I mean, we talked about this before, but like people particularly, like if I think about it from like the like first generation sort of expat, so like diaspora communities, so people whose parents or grandparents came from Africa, India, China. Often they will have grown up in households that had quite conflicting, not conflicting values, but the household had a particular value, which was more connected to the value system back home. And then there's the value system of the country they're growing up in. Now, so for me, growing up in like 90s London, 'cause I'm London born, bred and based, right? So London in the 90s was like a thriving, bustling sort of like pop culture scene. Like music was exploding and it was a center of the universe, like for like, for music because of Britpop. And so trying to square that with the value system at home was really interesting. And so there are lots of emotionally, there's lots of things that people like me or people like us would be really well placed to discuss, like the idea of trying to find your identity, maybe even trying to suppress your identity, being conflicted about being trying to hold space for two different feelings. Things aren't clear cut. I think you still find that now, and like the world is a confusing place to live in, and it's even more confusing in my case, if you've got a mother who's from one part of the world, a father from another part of the world, and together you're growing up in another part of the world, right? There's three different cultures all clashing, they're all fighting for space. And music is a great place to discuss that. Rock music, indie rock music, with all the tension that comes with it, unlike, say, the smoothness of, say, like R&B or jazz,
Mm,
rock music, there's a lot of like tension in that. And I think for me, that was the aesthetic that I was drawn to because it sounded like the thing that I felt. It sounded like the things I wanted to talk about, and it really described like my head. So I love hearing South Asian or Asian artists who look at rock music and say, that's my color, that's my palette, that's my canvas I'm going to use to paint with.
mm.
Because it makes sense to me. I totally get why you would go there with it, or even just using guitars. And some of the best guitarists I've ever heard have been guitarists who also incorporate some of like the more like classical learnings of like their parents' music, so to speak. Music they've grown up with that's been in
Mm.
the background. They've kind of lent into it and they've brought that on, into their instruments. So, but yeah, it's interesting. And it's really I think it's really important as well. I think you can go too far the other way. You can kind of whitewash yourself and just forget everything, all your
Yeah.
roots. But you can also you can do the opposite too. And I think the opposite can also be maybe sometimes problematic. Because I think if you end up making music that's in a cultural ghetto that doesn't accept the country you're living in and accept the influences around you, that can feel a little bit inauthentic as well.
Mm. And it reminds me of Apache, isn't it? We were talking about Apache off air. That's what
Yeah,
he did initially, wasn't he? Maybe not rock, but he talked about his experiences being
yeah,
a British born Asian. And
yeah,
yeah, even stuff like arranged marriage. I don't know whether you remember him talking about that song. Like basically,
yeah.
the end of it was that what was it the other song you mentioned that how is he going to tell his girlfriend that he's been married in India sort of thing. So
It's so funny, man.
yeah,
Yeah, I know. And that still happens. It still goes on, and I think what we're politically we're in an interesting space at the moment where because of like the dynamic of the left and the right has shifted again as it always tends to do throughout history
yeah,
and throughout times of like uncertainty or economic crisis you'll always get a rise in extremism on both sides.
yeah.
I think that can sometimes be reflected too in the values within music or the things that people talk about. So I think that is always a good, it sounds like a weird thing to say, but that's always a good thing for music because it makes music and art
It makes
really
sense. Yeah,
vibrant,
it makes
you know?
sense. It makes absolute sense because like basically you get people opinionated, which is what you want in music.
Yeah. Definitely, definitely. And there's always room for people that just write dance music or songs about dancing that don't really say anything. That's fine, and I love that. But I think if you're able to kind of go a bit further or go a little bit left or right with it and start to like have like a kind of like an opinion about things, it doesn't matter if that opinion divides people because too often you have like sometimes artists I'll be sat in with artists and they'll say, "Oh, I can't say that in the lyric," or "That's a bit too raw," or
Mm,
"That's going to alienate this demographic." And I always think, but so what? Like, if that's what you think, if that's what you feel, people are looking, your fans come to you for your opinions. They're not coming
mm,
to you to be a politician, to be a statesman, to be indifferent about everything and just say the right thing to all the people. Your job is literally to speak your mind. It's to say whatever you think. And as long as, like, we have free speech and art is a safe space for you to say what you think, you should say what you think regardless of the consequences. You should say what you think. And maybe that's dangerous advice, but I think that's how you make great art, and that's how you create um, conversation. And
absolutely,
whether
yeah.
people like, doesn't matter whether people like you or dislike you. If you're worried about people disliking you, then that's not the job. To do find another job, because
Yeah.
people are always going to dislike you.
It reminds me of James Blunt because I'm a big James Blunt fan, and a lot of his music is quite opinionated.
So
Like
yeah,
No
yeah,
Bravery and things like that. So and then he wrote this song which really resonated with myself because my dad passed away a few years ago, and he wrote the song We're Just Two Men uh, when his dad's about to die, and he writes about that experience, which really touched me. Like it brought tears to my eyes
yeah,
because it reminded me of my relationship with my dad and stuff. So
yeah.
another fantastic artist, James Blunt is. Yeah,
Yeah. Oh, that's yeah. I can imagine that. I can imagine the lyrics to that
yeah,
being very affecting if you've been through, like, as you say, something like so recently.
yeah,
It's yeah, and like you say, those kinds of universal themes, like the relationship that any like man or boy has with their father. There's a reason why there are cycles of songs that discuss that kind of thing,
yeah,
because it's like that is just going to be a different relationship to the one you have with your mother or your sister or your brother.
yeah.
It's like, so those are things that people throughout the ages have had to sort of explore or try and unpack. And there are always things we wish we'd said, or things maybe we said too much at some point, or we didn't say enough, and we wish we'd go back in time, or we have regrets or we don't have regrets. But that will never change. There'll always be no matter how much we learn about human consciousness or the human experience, there'll always be a generation of people born who have no wisdom, because we're born without really any
Hmm.
wisdom, and people will continue to make those mistakes, or not necessarily mistakes, but we will continue to have those sorts of relationships. And I think, like, the only way of like measuring time is in the distance that you yourself have walked, the steps you
Hmm.
have walked from birth to death. And that is what time is. It's your experience of time. Just because if somebody might have, how many wise people have lived and died through the ages and their wisdom is lost because it's only relevant to them and maybe the people they spoke to about it. So music is such a great outlet for somebody to try and get that out there, that kind of oral tradition of passing wisdom out and talking about things. If we don't talk about things, how will people ever learn from our experiences?
Absolutely. I think you need to write a book, Jason, because books are it's basically you're buying a person's life wisdom in a book, aren't you?
That's a great way of thinking about it.
Yeah,
Yeah,
that's what I
yeah,
think.
yeah, yeah.
So that's why I appreciate books so much because basically you're just paying like £10 for a guy's whole life experience.
Yeah, yeah,
Really,
yeah,
especially if it's like non-fiction, if it's like something to do with I don't know how to do this, and you're buying that person's wisdom for
yeah.
£10, which is an
It's a
amazing
great,
deal.
great way of looking. It's a great way. It's a great deal, isn't it? It's a
Yeah.
fantastic deal. Yeah.
Anyway, let's get back on subject about the mentoring thing. So, Jason, you've been like with Battle and the people you've worked with, right? Which has been pretty. Oh, so I've lost my notes here. Hey, where's my notes gone? I've lost my notes. Let's give me get my notes back here. Yeah, so you've been with great people like Calvin Harris and stuff. So there must have been a point like you worked all these people, these great stars, and you're really humble about it because if you it's just like, oh, yeah, I worked with these guys and whatnot, it's not a big deal. But when the high hype dies down, right?
Yeah.
How do you deal with that? Like, so there must have been a point when you stop, not maybe stop working, but your work's not as high
Yeah, yeah,
profile.
of course.
So how
Yeah.
do you deal with that?
It's, I think it's very easy to think when you are working in a high profile situation that it's because of your own talent. And a bit of that is true, but you can't believe the hype. You can't get caught up in your own ego, because often it's to do with like timing, luck, network. All of those people that 80% of those people, I knew them or I knew of them when they were nothing, when they were no one, and when they were small, and no one ever thought they were going to be that big. So it's very easy to say, the person who signed the band Radiohead, I had no idea Radiohead were going to go on to become the biggest band in the world for years. They were just like a little kind of band from Oxford that probably weren't even very good. It's very easy for them to start to believe their own hype and go, you know what, I signed Radiohead. It's like, I mean, yeah, but like you had no idea. I mean, sometimes you're working with people and they've got talent, but it's really important to also say this. You'll be in situations with high profile artists high quality artists who are producing very low quality work. Because in that moment, not every idea is great. So it's very easy to say if you're in a session and like Usher's there and there's some other writers, you like every minute of that must have been genius. And to be honest, no, like there's lots of average moments. A lot of music is quite average when it's being made. It's like
Mm.
a percentage of it is brilliant, and maybe you don't even realize that. Maybe it's somebody else who realizes, oh, that's the hook, or that's the bit, or that idea, that lyrical idea is genius. Maybe it happens after the session. So really, you've got to kiss a lot of frogs before you find your prince, and you don't really know. It's very hard when you're in the trenches to know that thing that's gonna blow up, because the audience decide that. All you know is if you're working on something that's got impact, if it's got value, like I think this says something, and then you release it, and maybe it doesn't land with people, or maybe it does. But I think nowadays it's really hard to say what the big song's going to be. Like you have an idea of like, that's a good song. Like I think it sounds good. It's got a hook. It's got a hook in it. It's or whatever. Like it's catchy. I think it's really cool. It feels innovative. You put it out there, and you don't know. So what I'm trying to say is, in those moments when you're working with high profile people, there's so many other factors that are involved. There's so many variables involved in that. And so when that dies down, it's because your life situation has changed. It's because maybe you
Mm.
don't answer the phone as much. Maybe because you're not saying yes to everything. That's a big part of it. When I back then, I just said yes to everything. And if someone asked me to do something and I didn't know how to do it, I just said yes and I'd figure it out later.
I don't even
I
remember what
would
you're saying.
yeah, and sometimes I would just do stuff. I would sort of, what's the phrase? Don't ask for permission at the time. Ask for forgiveness later. It's like if you're going to sample something or if you're working on something that sounds too close to somebody else's song. Nowadays, I might be like, oh, I don't know, maybe we need to move off this idea. Back then, I'd be like, oh, whatever, let's just do it. Like if the lawyers come for us, it's fine. Who cares? You're just running. You're running every race, but at some point you just don't want to do that, right? So naturally you're not going to have as many like fishing rods, in the river. You're not out there fishing every day. So it doesn't bother me in the same sense. I was working 16-hour days and I didn't have days off. I had no days off. So I mean, yeah, I mean, how's that for a life? I mean, if you want to have that life, you can have that life, and you will work with lots of people, but you won't have much of a life, so to
Mm.
speak, after that because there is
This was
no.
before kids, wasn't it?
Yeah, I mean, there's no way you could do that
Yeah.
now. There's just no way. I know people who've tried to do that. They've tried to kind of have their cake and eat it, but because there are only so many hours in the day, something's got to give. So usually it ends in like divorce. It ends in you not seeing your kids and your kids not knowing who you are, and like there's not any amount of gold records in the
Yeah.
world that would like make up for that for me.
Yeah. It's
It's
not worth it, is it? Yeah.
just not worth it.
Yeah.
It's not worth it.
Oh, interesting. Really interesting. So, okay. Um, so in essence, it's normal anyway for you, isn't it? So when you're working with all these artists, so there's no real low after it. Is that what you're saying, Jason? If I've paraphrased you correctly?
Yeah, I think so. I think you are moving from one project to another. There's always a project happening. Maybe that project is less like high profile in terms of like from a media point of view, but it's just as important to you. I mean, you mustn't say yes to doing things that your heart's not in. So from my point of view, I'm always working on something I care about.
Mhm.
I'm always working on something that means something to me. Um, as you get a bit older, you start to see the value in working with artists that might not be mainstream and might never be mainstream, but you
Mm.
believe in their work, you believe in their art, and you believe in the concepts that drive them. So sometimes you work with someone who you know is only ever going to maybe shift 2,000 copies of vinyl, and they might not do much, and they might work at a really slow pace, but you believe in them and you believe in what they're about. And I think that's, as long as you can like financially justify that, as long as because you've got to be a good business person as well, right? There's no point, ending up in like poverty because you just said yes to loads of projects that weren't going to pay. It's a job like anything, really. You've got to make some money out of it. But
Mm,
if you can get to a place in life where you separate how you make money and in terms of how you make music, so you're not relying on music to make all your money, you're actually in some ways in a much purer place. You can make the music you want to make, how you want to make it, when you want to make it, because your earning side of life is taken care of, and
mm,
you haven't got to worry about that as much. If you're solely reliant on your music to make you money, you start to make decisions about your music that are informed by whether you'll make more or less money.
mm,
I'm not saying that's bad, but I'm just pointing that out. You
mm.
know?
That's really interesting because it is bad in a way. Like for me, it would be because it would change the direction I want to go to take my music
Yeah,
and it's determined by, oh, this is making more money, so I'm going to try this instead.
yeah.
And
Well, I'll give you an example. I can't say who it was, unfortunately. No, I can't. But I was working with a band, really big band. They were coming up to their third album. Now they'd already kind of broken out of the big sort of club scene where you're playing to sort of between 5 and 8,000 people, and they wanted to break into arenas. That was the business like remit to themselves. That was the kind of concept they were going for. So in the studio, loads of the ideas they were kicking about, they were like, I think this doesn't feel like it's going to be like arena enough. It doesn't feel like, we need to we want people to be like punching the air. Like, and I'm like, that's cool. I get that. You want to do that. But I was like, we've got some really cool ideas here. They might be, maybe it's more of a headphones track, this one, or maybe this one's a bit of a smaller song, but it's just as good. They're like, no, 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 it's got to be like, everything's got to be big. It's got to be like, we want to make as much money. We want to sell arena tickets. And I was like, I sort of lost a little bit of heart in that because
mm,
to me, it's like you're turning your back on really good ideas and really good material and really good concepts, like lyrical ideas, because they weren't basic enough. They were like, the average person is going to be able to like, they were getting into like the phonetics of like how you sing stuff. I'm like, and that's really smart. It's really smart to think about that. And loads of big bands have done that. Maybe they've done it more unconsciously, or they've had a hit that just happened to work because it was because the writing style naturally lent itself there. But when you are so 100% focused on just the money side of it and like this and everything you write musically is connected to like how many tickets you're going to sell, I think that's a dangerous place. It's a very slippery
mm.
slope. Do you know what I mean? I mean, like, and good luck to people who can do that very well, who can do it in a kind of invisible way. So you hear the music and you're like, wow, that's amazing. And you've got no idea it was written literally to like a brief, you know?
Gosh,
Um,
it's quite
when I say a
manufactured.
brief, yeah, it feels very manufactured. And this is like not coming, and it's fine if it's like K-pop and it's like everyone's going in with their eyes open. Like, this is manufactured. We want to sell as many records to as many kids as possible. This is business. But when it's like a band that have kind of evolved from a certain place of like, we're doing this, we're trying to create great art that says something, and then they start to have these very conscious ideas about, you know, like, you guys are making money. You're already making lots of money. It's like, but you feel this need to take a step up to move to the
Mm,
next level, to level up now. No one, because the record label maybe is saying, okay, right, guys, we need to move you up into like arena level. Um, but maybe there's a cooler way to get there. Maybe you don't have to do the typical thing. You could get there another way.
what would that be? Could you give me an example? Sorry, I'm asking you loads of random questions. Whatever. I'm genuinely interested.
Well, I think like, but there wasn't a blueprint for what arena music sounded like until
Mm,
bands like Queen, for example, naturally sounded quite big. Like a song like "We Will Rock You" just works in a big arena because it's like doom doom doom
iconic.
doom ka. 10,000 people can stamp that, and it doesn't sound messy. If
No.
you've got like a rhythm like doom 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 ka doom ka doom, you can't have 10,000 people clapping that or
Yeah.
stamping that. It just doesn't. It's too complex, right?
Yeah.
So I think if you naturally make music that has this kind of space to it, and it's kind of what I say like naturally anthemic, then that's fine. But I think if you're consciously going into a place of like, we need to write music that sounds basic, so that like it's then I think that's a problem because your music is going to sound basic, not simple. And there's a difference
Mm.
between simple and basic. Simple is something that like is like uncomplicated. It's like you say something complicated, but in a very uncomplicated way. That's beautiful. That's poetry. But if you're deliberately trying to say things that are just simple, that are just basic, right? Like baby, 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 I love you, baby. Well, what are you saying here? Like people, we've got enough songs that say that. People have been
Mm.
doing that for years, and that's more forgivable in the 50s and maybe the
Yeah,
60s. But we've moved on. We've moved past
yeah,
that. So
yeah,
find a new way of saying you can write a love song. Of course, you can write a love song, but there's got to be a newer way of writing a love song.
yeah.
What's the freshest way you can say I love you? You know?
Very
Maybe
interesting.
you say it without do it without using the words "I love you." Let's first of all not use those lyrics. Let's find another way of saying it.
Yeah, really
Yeah,
interesting.
maybe. But it's difficult. I get that it's difficult because the more music we've had now, 70 years of pop music, that's a lot of boxes that have been ticked. That's a lot of ground that's been covered. So it makes it harder and harder for musicians to find unique and idiosyncratic ways of communicating with the audience.
Do you reckon there's a
And
bit
that's
of
the
laziness as well? Because you have to put a lot of effort in. If you want to reinvent lyrics and stuff, you find out you have to read and you have to listen and do you reckon there's a bit of laziness, or maybe not laziness is the wrong word, a bit of a pressure maybe just to get things done fast.
Yeah, I think so. I think it's like any art form, like whether you're making movies or like trying to write non-fiction, books like novels, it's there are like it gets harder to say stuff that other people haven't said. So you have to really like dig quite deep. And but there is more on the table now to talk about than there was before,
Mm,
So lyrically speaking, even from even from a kind of centerist mainstream pop angle. So you want to make a great dance pop song, right? It doesn't matter what the genre is. Ultimately, you are saying quite what you're talking about isn't that complicated. You're trying to
no.
make people, you're physically trying to move them towards a dance floor. So back in the day, I like, really going back to the 70s or 80s, it's like you'd say things like, throw your hands up in the air like you just don't care. I want to see your body on
Yeah.
the dance floor.
Yeah,
Like,
yeah.
come on, get off the wall. It's more innocent, it's more wholesome because there wasn't really a culture of dance music. I mean, there was, but not in that kind of more like formalized sense,
Yeah.
right? So like disco. But then as you move beyond that, maybe that there are other ways of convincing somebody to dance, right? I don't know what that is, but you're gonna have to dig into that. So um, another example, let me give you another example, like with Ed Sheeran's song "Thinking Out Loud,"
Hmm.
which when it was released became like a song that people played at their weddings, and it kind of overtook songs like "Every Breath You Take" by the Police. It became like this kind of big wedding song, and if you look at the lyrics to that song, if you read the lyrics, they talk about things that people were afraid to talk about in pop songs before, like the idea of getting old and you'll be becoming frail and
Mm,
infirm and grow up when my hands don't, my hands can't play the strings and when your legs don't work like they used to, all this kind of stuff, which always felt like quite ugly lyrics. Like you wouldn't have said that in like a wedding song before. It
mm,
felt like, why do you want to remind people that they're going to get old and they're going to die? But what's great about that song, and that song is quite an old song now, is that Ed Sheeran found a way, with or without his writers, to kind of say very like raw things that touch people's actual fears. Like if you're really in love with someone, there will be moments where you look at them and you'll be like, damn, like I really hope I die before you because I don't want to live in a world where you're not in it.
it's deep, man.
And or you look at them, right? You look at them and you're like, if we're lucky, we're going to be really old. We're going to live a long life. But the problem with getting old is we won't look like we are now, and we're going to be
Mm,
really frail. And that is gonna happen. That's just gonna happen,
yeah.
right? Or our kids will never see us the way we are now because by the time our kids are our age, we're going to be really old, and they'll never know us the way we are now. Like these are things that everyone thinks about. If you have kids or if you get married, these are just like these are common fears. But usually in pop music, we don't talk about those things. But over time, those conversations get wider and wider. So
Mm.
there's more on the table to talk about. So to come back to your question, like you do have to dig deeper, and it would be nice and easy to be more lazy and just kind of like say the same old thing. But I think we shouldn't do that. I think you have an artist, sorry, an artist has a responsibility to try and keep pushing the wheel further along. You haven't got to reinvent the wheel. You just got to push it further down the road.
Mm.
That's the
Here's it.
job.
After you, sorry, I interrupted.
No, that's what I was going to say. I think that's your job as an artist. Your job isn't just to kind of sit back and we are standing on the shoulders of giants. Like we've got all the great artists that came before us. They had to do the same thing. So it's not like we're starting from scratch. We are already really far along. Our baseline is of a very high quality. So we just have to look around us and be like, "There's some great stuff going on. What little things can I add value?" No one's asking you to reinvent the wheel. You just got to tweak it slightly. You got to bring a little bit more value from your
Mm.
own life, your own head, and that's all anyone really expects, I think.
Yeah, I was just gonna say, like, basically, it just reminds me of like I'm a Punjabi artist primarily, so I write my own lyrics. Um, but recently, I've been going back. I need to read more poetry. But
Mm,
then the other side of it is if I read my poetry, and that's more like, Indian poetry, Punjabi poetry, and learn a bit of like Urdu and Hindi, learn to read and write. I can read and write Punjabi, but not Urdu and Hindi, which is it's quite useful in that thing. But on the other
yeah.
side of it, there's the songs that do well now, they're not very grounded in formal poetry. They're more
No,
like
no.
fusion words, like what kids use. I'm showing my age now, but kids use like words like swag and
Yeah.
this and bits and bobs, and so the language now is not it's not it's not how can say the language is not pure anymore. In
Mm,
that's a bad way of saying it. I don't mean pure because language is language, whatever people use, but it's not the formal language of old. And there was an art to it. That art's gone.
yeah.
It's
Yeah.
more, yeah. What's your
But you know
take on
what? Like,
that?
what I think, as you say, right, I think the clue to that is in what you said about language is always language. It's always evolving, and I bet if you went back 1,000 years and spoke to the elder poets, they'd say, what's all this new poetry that's coming out from all these young poets? Rubbish. It doesn't sound
Mm.
anything like the stuff from like,
Maybe,
the
yeah.
stuff from like 100 years ago. I think it's just always evolving. I think we'll probably look ahead, people will look back maybe in 100 years and they'll say, wow, like English was so artful back in the early 21st century, and it's all gone down the pan now. I think it's okay. I think it's okay to, like, no one's saying that you need to speak with an old tongue necessarily, but I think if there were certain qualities about if there are certain great qualities we can learn about old art forms, it's that I don't think people were necessarily as lazy because there weren't so many distractions. So people had a bit
Mm.
more time. I think things things kind of marinated and kind of percolated and simmered over time. And I think we're talking about when we were offline, talking about, say, like the golden era of like Hindi Bollywood soundtracks,
Hmm.
right? And when you listen to that music and you look at the lyrics, there's just so much time. It's quite clear that so much time has gone
Yeah.
into it. Um, and that's what's really hard now is like the level of discipline someone needs to kind of exhibit to not be distracted, and when they're working on their music, like working on their art, really stay in that lane and stay focused and kind of get it done. Because you can see in a lot of like modern releases where people say, do you know what, it doesn't matter, it's not going to make any money, it's going to disappear by next week, why would I put my heart and soul into this thing?
Mm.
And to that, I say, yes, okay, that's quite possibly true. But by you not committing all your energy to this thing, or as much energy as you can, you are ensuring it will disappear. Because I guarantee you, in this complete snowstorm of 60,000 uploads to Spotify every day, I guarantee you in 10 years, there will be songs that make it through the noise. And those songs will be the songs where those artists have dug a little bit deeper. I'm
Mm,
not talking about having the perfect production, having the perfect voice, or having like the perfect chord sequence. There will just be something about that piece of music where someone has dug really deep and they've said something really meaningful. And you will get songs, like a couple of songs every year will stand the test of time, and people will still be singing those songs in 10, 20, 50 years. But if you just accept, oh, what's the point? Like, we might as well just do this thing as quickly as possible and just get it out there. You are just insured. That's a death sentence to your art. Like, what's the point of even doing it? So
really
I think
interesting.
language will change. Yeah, language is going to change and it's going to evolve, and and that's fine. And I think no one, you don't have to speak like a roadman. You don't have to kind of, it doesn't have to be something that every level gets. I think you have to speak to your peers, your tribe. So as you get older, maybe your tribe is changing, maybe they're growing too, and they don't necessarily, it's going to be really, really in the same way that's really hard in the 60s when you had all these music business moguls who were like in their 50s and 60s saying, we got to make music that the kids understand. So what they did then was, instead of trying to like make the music, because how can a 50-year-old make music for a 15-year-old? They hired loads of young people to go and sign artists who were closer in age to them. And I think
Mm,
the same is true if you flip it. As you get older, there's no point trying to make music for a section of society that you no longer are inhabiting. You've got to make music for your peers and contemporaries, and that's people who understand your life experiences. So I think as you get older, naturally your music is going to mature, and you're going to talk about things that you wouldn't have spoken about when you were 20, because when you're 30 or 40 or
mm.
50, your audience is growing with you. And if you make music that lands with an 18-year-old, 18 to 25, that demographic, brilliant. That's excellent. But I think that doesn't have to be your goal, you
No.
know?
Do you think the industry is changing in the way that that was perceived before? Because um, is age a, still a decisive factor? Like, say you and I made music now, and it's the way music's gone. It's just anyone can listen. Anyone listens to it, sort of thing. Do you think that's
Yeah.
it's changed over time? Whereas before, as you said, like back in the '90s and stuff, the hit single would be like a model looking like George Michael or something. Like a good looking guy, and he'd had that demographic locked basically.
Yeah.
Do you reckon that's changed as an industry or?
It's changed completely. Like completely. Like it doesn't matter how old you are now. It just doesn't matter. It doesn't matter what you look like. Um, People don't care. And actually, for the first time ever, the demographics above 25, so like 25 to 30 and 40 to 50, those demographics are being listened to. And the economic sides of the industry are realizing that people are spending money on all strata. So, like all levels of the age kind of like, categorization are engaging in music. So, pop music used to be music that was like made for teenagers.
Mhm.
And that was, I mean, there was music for like, it was like easy listening and music for like mums, like mother's music or whatever. And there was jazz, right? But basically, pop music made up 80% of sales, and it was music that was aimed at basically teenagers. That's a very, very narrow age
Mhm.
group, but they made up all the record buying public. But what we've now realized is that everyone's buying music and everyone's engaging with music
Mhm.
because teenagers in the 60s were the only people really engaged with pop culture because their parents were slightly older, who were like the war babies, the war children, that they were of a generation of a mindset where when you got to a certain age, you tapped out of culture, you became an adult. That's it. You're not listening
Mm.
to the radio. You put the radio on, you're listening to the news. But since then, with those kids from the 60s who are now grandparents, and the children and all the generations below them, they're people that have stayed engaged with pop culture. So
Yeah.
everyone's listening to music all the time, and everyone's engaging with it. And people are going to gigs and, you know, buying merchandise. So I think now is the most exciting time ever to be an artist, because you don't have to just appeal to 18 to 20 or 15 to 21-year-olds or 18 to 24-year-olds. I mean, those
That's
days are
amazing, Jason.
over,
So,
over.
that's lovely it's lovely how you've put it. So here's one for you. Like, so this is I'm going off topic, but we do on this podcast. Um, so the other day I saw a post. So this is regarding the I don't know how much you know about the Bhangra industry. or Bhangra industry, let's say it
Not
properly.
not not a huge amount. Not a huge
So
amount.
what happened? It was invented in the UK. I don't know where you know that.
Right.
It was invented in
No.
the UK. So what happened was in the 70s, 60s, 70s, and 80s, immigrants came. So Bhangra was initially it was just a dance from India, folk dance, and you had Punjabi folk music. But
Mm.
the when the immigrants came here, they never had the music any music of their own, so they fused with the Western music, if I can speak properly, with Western music, and they invented Bhangra music in the
Right.
UK. So it's a UK
Right.
invention. So
Wow.
and
Wow.
that's why the UK musicians were so then they started going back exporting back over to India and Pakistan and Bangladesh all over the world basically, and it was known as the hub of Punjabi music. Bhangra music was the hub here, so you had all the bands like Alap, DCS, Pradesi. These were bands that were started in the Midlands, London, and it was fascinating. And so what happened was they up until the year 2000, up until the year 2000, they it was still here primarily. DJs took over and they started using sampling and doing doors. So basically, it became a door base rather than a band. It moved from bands to producers. So
Got
that
you
was the
right.
industry. But now it's switched to Canada because
Really?
yeah, it switched to Canada. So Canada's the hub of Bhangra music now, but it's not Bhangra anymore. It's not like it's basically hip hop with
Okay.
Punjabi
Okay.
lyrics. That's what's happened.
Yeah.
But the other day, I saw a post on Facebook and social media that we need to support more UK artists because it's a dying thing here. Even though there's a lot of people trying, but they they they're struggling with it. So what? And please feel free to ask me questions. Though, but what do you think can be done for UK artists? Because it's switched over there. And ask me questions because obviously I've given you half a picture because
Yeah.
they were saying, "Oh, the audience needs to listen and support the UK artists," but I don't agree with that because why should the audience listen if they're not relating with the music? So it's
Yeah.
something
Yeah.
the artists are doing wrong rather than this is my opinion, rather than the audience not supporting. They're listening to the Canadian artists because they can relate with that.
Yeah. I think that's very true. I think you've said it in a nutshell because it isn't the audience's job to know what to how can I put it? It's like if if you make something and it doesn't sell, but people are aware of it and they're like, well, we tried it, but it doesn't work as well. We're going to go for this other product. It's not the it's not the customer's fault, right? It's like all you can do is try and make something that is useful to people. So presumably, when Bhangra scene was happening, it really like it was a soundtrack to something people didn't know they needed
Hmm.
but when they heard it, they were like, "We want this! Like, we really want this. We're going to eat this up." And then if that audience has moved on, maybe, and they're starting to kind of like tune into sort of different sounds. Maybe, as you say, that the Canadian sound is a bit more like hip hop based, because
Hmm.
then as pop culture moved on, it's embedded much more
Hmm.
of that hip hop kind of sounds. Then it might be that the UK leg of it is maybe a bit more stuck in the past, and maybe their sounds maybe are a bit too kind of non-progressive. That could be a big part of it when things don't like progress enough. Um, but it could also be that maybe is there more of a diaspora in Canada? Is there more of a kind of an expat community there that are trading ideas and cross-pollinating and ensuring that the new ideas are far more compelling and more arresting to sort of listen to. Has something become stale in the UK Bhangra scene? Is the question. I don't know the answer. Would you say that as somebody who's
So
more kind of clued up about it?
what's interesting is that immigration to the UK happened in the 70s
Hmm.
and immigration in the 90s, Canada happened primarily in the 90s. So
Yeah.
I think you've sort of summed it up, and those kids are growing up into the sort of 90s 2000 kids have grown up, they're the ones who are producing the music now, so there's a 20-30 year gap, isn't there? So
Yeah.
yeah.
And it happens in all genres because when a genre finds success, what tends to happen is it enters like a philosophically it enters like a stasis. So like 60s music, because it was so successful, like people that were making pop music happened to be using guitars, bass, and drums.
Mhm.
What then happened was it developed a kind of halo effect around it where people then defended that sound. They said that's the way guitar bands should sound. So then you had a whole load of people who were saying, well, this is what pop music should sound like. And all these younger kids will be like, well, no, 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 no. We've got new instruments now. We've got keyboards in the 70s. We've got keyboards now. We don't have to use guitars. And people say, no, 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 no. This is what guitar music sounds like. You've got two guitars, a bass, and a drum kit. That's what guitar bands sound like because it was so successful. It became its own sound. Same thing happened with punk music in the 70s. Punk was so successful. Punk is an idea. It's about like tearing up an old philosophy and starting again. But because the punk bands were using guitars and they looked a certain way and they had spiky hair, all the punks that came later on were like, no, that's what punk music should sound like and look like. And the later punks, who were like the hip hop guys in America, because that's what hip hop is punk music, they were like, what are you talking about? We've got like we've got vinyl and decks. We're still punks, but we don't use guitars. And all the traditional punks who were like traditionalists were like, no, 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 it's not punk music. So I've got a feeling like when something becomes super successful, people say like, okay, we've locked down the sound. That's what it is. And then a whole new generation come up who want to do their version of this thing. And the old guys now who've grown up and they're much older, they've made their money, they're successful. They're like, we are the patrons of Bhangra. And these new kids are like, no, you're not. We are the pioneers of Bhangra because Bhangra doesn't sound like that anymore. This is what it would sound like to us. And
Mm.
then you get a tension between the old guard, between the guys who grew up in the 70s making music in the 90s, the kids who grew up in the 90s making music in the early noughties. So it stands to reason because of the way the generations have shifted that there is a kind of rejection of old values and a reluctance to embrace those newer values by the older generation. It's like a schism that happens.
Mm.
Happens in all genres.
That's amazing.
It's
uh,
like you get in hip hop, man. It's like if you let in hip hop, it's like if you about the golden era of hip hop in the 80s, right? They struggled with like newer artists like Eminem. And then you got people like Dre and Snoop and Eminem who
yeah.
struggle. Well, there's lots of memes online, like the way they consider people like Migos or like Kendrick Lamar. There's a real kind of like now Eminem's like the old guard. Eminem is like the elder statesman. And if you listen to their flows and their bars and listen to the way the hip hop music's put together, it's very different to the way someone like Kendrick would put music together, right? So there's a kind of like the young guys are like looking at the old guys being like, that's too OG uncle. It's like it's kind of giving Unk vibes. And they're like, we wouldn't do it like that. And the old guys are like, what do you mean? Like, we're still fresh, aren't we? This is how you make. We're still like at the
Mm.
bleeding edge of hip hop. And then you realize actually maybe you're not, and maybe these young kids actually understand the form way better than you ever could because you were them. You were once them and you didn't have to have it explained to you. You just knew what was good and what wasn't good. You knew what was fresh and what was stale. And you have to, at some point, you have to accept that, like, the next generation, they just get it in a way that the older guys
Mm.
aren't going to get,
That's what I'm
you
working
know?
with my nephew who's 18. So he's doing all the
Yeah.
music and sounds, and I'm taking his advice, even on the singing part, Jason. I was saying to you,
Yeah.
like, he said to me, and he's 18, he's got all these fresh ideas, and which I've never heard of. Like, he does them all on his Mac, and he's got these fresh ideas. And he said to me, he says, Raj, I don't want you to sing this. I want you to half sing it. I don't want you to sing
Yeah.
like a singer. Just sing it like that.
Yeah.
And so we song and recorded. I did a guide for it, and he goes, and afterwards he says, "No, that one's all right." So
Yeah.
it's funny how like see that's really an alien concept to me. Like I would rehearse
Yeah.
2 weeks before actually doing that song, but he goes, "No, it captures the raw essence of it." So
Yeah.
it just
Yeah.
says what you say, new ideas and fresh, and it goes back to what we were saying off air as well. That do you remember
Yeah.
what you're saying about your mixes and actually the raw version
Yeah.
was better. So yeah,
Yeah, yeah, and that's what we're finding a lot. Like, I think also what really helped that idea of like keeping things almost like manufacturing this idea of like rawness was like in lockdown where people didn't have access to studios. People were still making music for those couple of years. How are they making them? in their bedrooms at home. A lot of big producers couldn't go to their studios, so they were having to like make stuff, and kids were making, a lot of kids were coming of age. That was the age they turned 15 or 16 and started making music, and they couldn't just go to a studio. They had to just do it on their own, often using the mic on their laptop. So what you're hearing is really music that's really successful, that had they been in a studio would have sounded different. People weren't playing gigs, so the music was designed for headphones, and that created a whole new kind of era of music that was more intimate, and it was rawer, and it was more brutal. And we can't erase that now. That exists, and that has left its mark, its legacy in pop music and production. So we have to be aware of that, and we have to also be really accepting of it, and be like, this is a thing that people went through, and this is how their music responded. We can't just erase that and just ignore that. People made art during this very difficult time, and the art sounded like the thing that they were going through. So what is the legacy of that now? And people have still incorporated that. And that half singing thing, it's very common. Like, you hear a lot of artists do that thing, and even like, say, look at like the pop space, someone like Pink Pantheress, when she does a vocal, very different to the way Christina Aguilera or Britney Spears would have done a vocal, or Ariana, even just a few years before, like really singing the vocal, like almost musical theatre. Pink Pantheress kind of like sings it. It's very like non-committal, very low energy, but it's very cool. It's very just like, it's just very cool, and it has its own vibe, which is great.
Man, I was going to say, Jason, it's been 50 minutes. It seems like 10 minutes, but we're almost an hour.
I know, and I've just realised that I've actually got to go, because I've got to take my kids to the park. So it's just, yeah. It's a classic example of like, you've got a tiny window of time.
Yeah.
Let's go. So we might have to end it, and maybe we jump back on. We do a part 3 or something.
Jason, I'm thinking, if you were up for this, I'm gonna say this on air, but if he said no, it's fine. I think we should catch up on the podcast every like 6 months or so, and just to like, I love picking your brain, because it's fascinating to me, and I always leave inspired by you, and I'm sure
I'm glad. I'm glad. I'm just like, I only know what I know because I spent time talking to people as well, right? Yeah. So I feel like talking is the best it's the best form of education, just trading ideas. And yeah, it's a joy to talk to you about it. It's a joy to kind of remember things, because a lot of time I don't remember stuff until your question triggers a memory. So it's nice to be able to, oh yeah, I remember that, and then you talk about it. It's nice.
Yeah, when you're writing your book.
Yeah. Oh my God. Yeah. Yeah. The pressure's on there.
Yeah. I need your lifetime of wisdom in a book for £10. I'll pay an extra 5 or 15. Well, I'll get the hardback. Yeah.
I appreciate that, man. I appreciate it. Well, listen, let me know. Let me know when you want to jump back on, and I'm always here.
That's fantastic, Jason. Again, an amazing privilege, Jason. If you just let everyone know your socials, we are going to plug more socials this time for you. So sure. I'll add you as a collab and stuff. So, but if you let the audience know before you go quickly, where they can catch you.
Yeah, you could just, I mean, Instagram is probably the best place to get me. So it's just Bavanandan, at Bavanandan. That's my surname, Bavanandan, on Instagram, and you can find me there. I usually respond to I get quite a lot of messages, but I try and respond to every message that's like, that's not from a bot, basically. So if you message me, I will get back to you at some point.
That's fantastic. So guys, I'm gonna let Jason go, because he has to. He's got his kids to go to the park with. My kids are going to the park with my wife at the moment. So just to give me this time here. So I'll probably catch up with them. So guys, thank you so much, and until we meet again, the Raj Kaul Podcast. Keep it locked. Leave a review, like, and a share as well, and a follow if you're watching on YouTube. God bless you all. Bye bye.